Now remember, when you set up a chessboard, you always want to have a light square in the lower right-hand corner of the board. And in the beginning of the game, white always goes first. But we'll get to that later. Now we're going to learn the language of chess, what's called algebraic notation. The vertical columns on the chessboard, the files, are lettered A through H. This is the A file, the B file, C, D, E, F file, G file, H file. The horizontal ranks are numbered 1 through 8. This is the first rank, second rank, third rank, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth rank. So if we're talking about this square, we line up the letter, which we see is the D, and the number 5. This is the D5 square. This is the F6 square. This square over here, line up the letter and the number, the C7 square. Why don't you try a few? Let's try a few exercises. Touch the D5 square with your cursor. You got it. Now touch the B1 square. Now touch the E7 square. Touch the H. Touch the H. Now let's get to know the chess pieces. This is the king. This is the queen, the rook, the bishop, the knight, and the pawn. Now let's learn the values of all the pieces. The pawn is the weakest piece on the chessboard. It's also known as the unit of value in chess. So the strengths of the other pieces are measured by the number of pawns that they're worth. The knight is worth around 3 pawns. The bishop is also worth around 3 pawns. We'll talk more about this later. The knight and the bishop are both worth around 3 pawns, but they move very, very differently. In some positions, knights are stronger. In other positions, bishops are stronger. And you'll learn about these nuances in a little bit. For now, knight 3 pawns, bishop 3 pawns. The rook is a powerful piece. It's worth 5 pawns. The queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard. It's worth 9 pawns. The king doesn't really have a value that can be measured with pawns because the king, though not so powerful, cannot be lost. The aim of the game is to capture the enemy king. So your king has infinite value, although not all that much power. Now that you know all the chess pieces, let's learn how to set up the board. Remember, both sides begin with a light square in the lower right-hand corner. So let's say you're white. The rooks go in the corners. Next to them come the knights. Then the bishops. And finally, the queen and king. An easy way to remember what color square to put your king and queen on is that the king always begins on the opposite color of what it is. So if it's a white king, it begins on a dark square. If it's a black king, it begins on a light square. Now the pawns cover the entire second rank. You begin with 8 pawns. Remember, I said the pawn is the least valuable piece, but you have a lot of them. So here we see white's setup. The rooks are in the corners. The white king is beginning on a dark square. The queen is beginning on the same color as she is. She's a white queen beginning on a light square. Bishops and knights, and the pawns cover the entire second rank. Now for black, it's the same. The pawns cover the entire 7th rank. The rooks go in the corners. The black king begins on a light square. The black queen begins on a dark square. Remember, the king always begins on the opposite color square of what it is, and the queen begins on the same color. So the black queen begins on a dark square, the black king begins on a light square. Then come the knights and the bishops. Now it's your turn. Click on each piece and drag it to its setup position on the board. So we've just learned the values of all the pieces and how to set them up. Now we'll learn how they move. The chess pieces might seem strange to you at first, but soon they'll feel natural, almost a part of you. Let's begin with the unit of value in chess, the pawn. Individually, pawns are the least powerful of all pieces, but there are more of them on the board than any other piece, so it's essential to learn how to use them in coordination. The game begins with each side possessing 8 pawns all lined up on the 2nd and 7th rank, as you've learned. In the beginning of the game, the primary function of the pawn is to take control of the center of the board and to protect the king. So this is how the pawn moves. On each pawn's first move, it has the option of moving ahead 1 square or 2. It's very important to remember that after its first move, pawns can only move ahead 1 square at a time. So here this e2 pawn can move to either e3 or e4, because it's that pawn's first move. But once it's on e4, it can only move to e5. The pawn possesses a number of unique qualities. First of all, the pawn is the only piece that cannot move backwards. So as we'll explore in part 3 of the Academy, we have to be careful not to overextend our pawn structure. You'll see more about that later. Also, the pawn is the only piece that captures differently from how it moves. Pawns move straight ahead, but they capture diagonally. This is tricky. So in this position, the white d3 pawn can capture black's pawn on c4, but not the black pawn on d4. In this position, the white pawn on d3 can't move at all. It's blockaded by the black pawn on d4, and there's nothing for it to capture. Despite being small, each pawn has enormous potential. The pawn's greatest power is called promotion. Anytime a pawn successfully journeys to the end of the board, it can transform into any other chess piece on the board, except for the king, of course. A queen, rook, knight, or bishop. We almost always promote into a queen, but there are rare exceptions which I'll show you a bit later. Highlight all the legal pawn moves. In this position, what do you think white should do? Good job. White can capture the pawn and will soon promote. In this position, it's white's move. Who do you think will promote first, white or black? No, that's not quite right. The white pawn can reach the back rank faster, because on its first move it can move ahead 2 squares. h4. Then black will play a5, white plays h5, a4, h6, a3, h7, a2, h8. White gets there faster. This exercise is a little bit trickier. It's black's move. What would you play? Good job. After black plays e5, white's position self-destructs, because the only possible pawn moves loses a pawn. After e5, white is forced to play d4, after which black can capture. There's a term for this type of position in chess, called zugzwang. What this means is that if I'm in zugzwang, any move that I make will hurt my position. I'm paralyzed, but I'm forced to move. So here you can see that come across on the board. If it's white's move, the only legal move is d3 to d4, after which black can capture the pawn. Now interestingly, if it was black's move and he played e4, the only legal move, white could capture that pawn. So in fact, this is a position of mutual zugzwang, which means whosever move it is will be in a big disadvantage.